In a quiet town, nestled between dusty hills and whispering palm trees, there lived a girl named Chinelo. From the moment she was born, her life carried a different rhythm, one that hummed softly beneath the surface of things. Chinelo bore a long, dark scar that ran from the top of her forehead down across her left cheek, a permanent reminder of a childhood accident that no one in the town liked to speak of. The story of the scar was wrapped in silence and shadow, and when asked, her father would only sigh and tighten his jaw. He was a tall man with strong, grease-stained hands and a stoic face that told of years spent bent over broken engines and busted car parts in his mechanic shop. He loved Chinelo fiercely, and though life had made him tough, his heart was soft when it came to his daughter. "Chinelo," he would say as he wiped his hands on an old rag, "true beauty is not what others see in your face. It's what they find in your heart." He did everything he could to provide for her, waking up before sunrise and returning home long after the stars had come out, all to ensure she could attend school and have a future brighter than his own. But the world outside their small, oil-scented home was not as kind as her father's words. At school, Chinelo faced a cruel reality. The children saw not the girl with dreams in her eyes and kindness in her voice, but the scar that split her, face like a lightning bolt frozen in time. They whispered behind her back and pointed when they thought she wasn't looking. Some didn't bother with whispers. They laughed out loud. One girl once leaned across a desk and giggled. "She looks like a broken pot." A boy had snorted. "Did your father try to fix your face like he fixes old cars?" But none of them were as cruel, as consistent, or as loud as William. William was everything Chinelo was not. He was popular, wealthy, effortlessly charming. His father owned the largest supermarket in town, and with that came the best of everything: clothes, shoes, even friends. Wherever William walked, people followed, like bees to honey. Teachers favored him, students envied him, and those who didn't like him at least respected his power. To Chinelo, William was a daily storm. Every morning brought a new insult, a fresh humiliation, and an audience eager to laugh along. "Dirty Chinelo," he once said, blocking the classroom door with his arms folded and that smug smirk on his face. "Why do you even come to school looking like that?" He gestured to her scar, his voice loud enough to echo down the hall. "Did your daddy patch your face like he patches up tires?" His friends howled with laughter. Chinelo didn't. She pressed her lips together, tightened her grip on her books, and walked past them with her head held high. She told herself she didn't care, that his words bounced off her like rain on a tin roof. But inside, something heavy clung to her chest, growing heavier with each day. Her scar burned hotter beneath the eye patch she wore, not from pain, but from shame, from the weight of their eyes. She felt small, she felt exposed, yet she endured. One sweltering afternoon, as the sun beat down upon the schoolyard and the scent of jollof rice and beans filled the cafeteria, Chinelo carried her tray with careful hands. She had saved her lunch money all week just for this, a special Friday meal of fried rice and crispy chicken. Her stomach rumbled as she searched for a seat, oblivious to the snickers around her, unaware that William and his gang had already prepared something wicked. As she placed her tray on the table and sat down, she didn't notice the water waiting on her chair. The cold hit her all at once, seeping through her skirt, clinging to her skin. For a second, there was silence. Then laughter. Wild, sharp, merciless. William's voice rang out like a trumpet of mockery. "Big Chinelo peed herself!" The entire cafeteria erupted, fingers pointed, faces twisted in glee. "Look at her skirt!" a girl shrieked. "She wet herself like a baby!" "Maybe she saw her face in the mirror and got scared," a boy howled, slapping the table. Even those who didn't want to join in smiled behind their hands, betraying her with their silence. Chinelo's fingers dug into the table. Her ears burned. Her heart pounded. The walls seemed to close in. But she would not run. Slowly, deliberately, she rose to her feet. The room fell silent once more, waiting, watching. She turned to William, her voice calm, steady, like the quiet before a storm. "I may be wet," she said, "but at least I'm not drowning in arrogance like you." The words struck the room like lightning. Laughter stopped. Whispers stilled. William's grin vanished. Chinelo turned, picked up her tray, and walked. Out, her back straight, her steps measured. But inside she was cracking. And William, he was furious. That moment, that defiance, lit a fire in him. He wanted to humiliate her completely, to crush her spirit. Days later, under a gray sky weeping gentle rain, Chinelo walked through the soggy schoolyard. Puddles of mud clung to the earth like dark secrets. The air was cold, but Chinelo felt only the fire of humiliation still burning inside her. She rounded the corner, and there they were, William and his pack blocking the path. "Where are you going, Big Chinelo?" William mocked, stepping forward. She didn't answer. She knew better. She turned to walk away, but they closed in, circling her like hyenas. Behind her, a large puddle glistened with thick, sticky mud. William grinned. Without warning, he shoved her. Chinelo stumbled backward and fell face first into the mud. Laughter exploded again, cruel and unrelenting. "Now your ugly face matches the ground," William bellowed, clapping. The sound of his voice echoed in Chinelo's skull as she sat up, her face and clothes dripping with muck. Tears burned at the back of her eyes, but she blinked them away. She would not give them that satisfaction. She stood. She walked. Covered in shame, she disappeared around the corner. That evening, Chinelo didn't go straight home. She sat behind the school building, knees drawn to her chest, and wept. The late sky darkened as if to share in her sorrow. Then a soft voice broke through her grief. "Why are you crying, my child?" She looked up and saw Mrs. Ella, the school cleaner, an older woman with silver hair wrapped in a scarf and hands worn from decades of labor. Her eyes were kind, wise. Chinelo wiped her face. "It's William. He keeps bullying me because of my scar." Mrs. Ella knelt beside her and handed her a small jar. "Rub this on your scar each night," she said. "And when someone insults you again, say, 'Thank you.' They will face the consequences." Chinelo blinked, confused. "Say thank you?" Mrs. Ella nodded. "They won't understand. But you will." Then she walked away, her mop echoing on the concrete. Chinelo held the jar. It smelled of herbs and mystery. She didn't believe in magic, but she believed in pain, and she was tired. That night, under the moonlight, Chinelo unscrewed the lid, dipped her fingers into the cool ointment, and spread it gently across her scar. It tingled. It didn't erase her hurt, but it soothed something inside her. Tomorrow she would fight again. The following morning arrived with a crisp stillness in the air, the kind that signaled something different was unfolding. The wind rustled the plantain trees outside Chinelo's window as she awoke, the little jar of ointment still sitting on her bedside table, like a quiet promise. She stared at it for a moment, her fingers tracing the lid, remembering Mrs. Ella's words. "Say thank you." The idea had seemed strange, absurd even, but somehow it clung to her, echoing in her thoughts like an unfinished sentence. Chinelo got dressed slowly, choosing her cleanest uniform, even pressing her collar with the old iron that hissed steam in their tiny kitchen. Her father had already left for work, leaving a pot of okra soup covered on the stove, and a folded note beside her breakfast plate. "Be strong, my Chinelo. Nothing can dim a bright soul." She smiled faintly, drawing strength from the scribbled message. The journey to school was quiet, and as she stepped into the courtyard, she could already feel the weight of dozens of eyes trailing her. Some students still whispered, others nudged their friends and grinned in anticipation. News of her fall into the mud puddle had traveled faster than Harmattan winds. But Chinelo held her head high, her stride firm and unyielding. The scar on her face shimmered slightly in the morning sun, the ointment having left a soft sheen on her skin. She had expected William to strike again that day, and he did not disappoint. It was in the assembly hall that he made his entrance, swaggering in with his untucked shirt and that same sneer that had haunted her for years. He walked straight up to her in front of everyone, a fake look of concern on his face. "Oh, Chinelo," he said, voice dripping with mockery. "How's the mud? Did it teach you how to swim yet?" Laughter erupted from the circle of students that had instinctively formed around them, ready for another show. Chinelo looked up at him, her expression calm, unreadable. She drew in a slow breath, blinked once, and then said with a clear, strong voice, "Thank you, William." The room paused. The laughter faltered. William's face tightened. "What did you say?" he asked, louder now, confused. "Thank you," she repeated, even more firmly, eyes never leaving his. "You're helping me become stronger. You just don't know it yet." A hush fell over the crowd like a dropped curtain. Some students exchanged glances. A few even murmured beneath their breath. Chinelo didn't wait for another insult. She stepped past him and walked to her seat, her back straight, her dignity untouched. William stood there, stunned, unsure how to respond to a reaction he hadn't prepared for. Something had changed, and everyone could feel it. From that day on, Chinelo began to walk differently. She stopped flinching when laughter rippled through the halls. She no longer avoided mirrors or tried to cover her scar with the old head wrap she used to wear on bad days. She met people's eyes now. She smiled without apology. The transformation was subtle at first, but like water shaping rock, it grew powerful over time. She started answering more questions in class, volunteering, for debates, even joining the drama club, where her voice carried like thunder on stage. At first, some laughed, but soon they began to listen. Her teachers took notice. Mr. Ayodele, her literature teacher, began calling on her more often. "Chinelo," he'd say with a nod, "what do you see in this poem?" And her answers, rich with thought and emotion, often left the room in silence. She was no longer just the girl with the scar. She was the girl with the voice. And yet, William did not stop. His pride had been wounded, and he responded with greater cruelty. He spread rumors, tore pages from her notebook, dumped her lunch in the trash when no one was looking. One afternoon, she found her school bag soaked in urine behind the science block. She cried then, but only for a minute. She cleaned the bag, rewrote her notes, and returned the next day with the same quiet fire in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered under her breath as she passed William in the corridor. It was as if her very resilience enraged him further. But now, something was shifting in the hearts of others. A girl named Tommy, once one of William's silent followers, stopped laughing at his jokes. "She's brave," Tommy whispered to a friend after Chinelo delivered a powerful monologue during drama rehearsal. "You see how she stood there like she didn't care." One by one, students began to see her differently. They started greeting her in the halls. Some even sat beside her at lunch. She helped a boy struggling with math one afternoon, and soon more students came to her for help. Chinelo began tutoring in the library twice a week. The librarian gave her a corner to use, and she brought her own textbooks from home. The little corner became crowded quickly. Even the teachers began to refer struggling students to her. Meanwhile, William watched from the sidelines, his grip on power loosening. He threw insults like stones into a river, but they no longer made ripples. The tide was changing, and he didn't know how to stop it. Chinelo, however, didn't gloat. She didn't seek revenge. She simply kept growing like a flower pushing through concrete. Her scar remained, but it was no longer a mark of shame. It had become a symbol, a story, a strength. One Saturday, she returned to the old cleaner, Mrs. Ella, who was scrubbing the school porch in her faded wrapper and flip-flops. "It worked," Chinelo said, tears brimming in her eyes. "I did what you said. I said thank you." Mrs. Ella looked up, smiled with a mouthful of wisdom, and nodded slowly. "Now you understand," she said. "Your strength doesn't come from being untouched by pain. It comes from refusing to be broken by it." That night Chinelo stood before her mirror. She touched the scar gently and smiled. The ointment was nearly finished, but she no longer needed it. The magic, she realized, had never been in the jar. It had been inside her all along. Weeks flowed into months like a quiet river shaping a valley, and Chinelo's life continued to evolve beneath the steady rhythm of growth, resistance, and awakening. The once timid girl who shrank beneath taunts had now blossomed into a beacon others sought in moments of confusion and despair. Her presence in school had shifted from invisible to undeniable. She didn't demand attention, but it found her anyway, drawn to the certainty in her eyes, to the grace with which she carried her scars. She had started writing her thoughts in a little blue notebook she carried everywhere, not for praise, not for grades, but because she had stories swelling inside her that needed a place to land. "Words are power," Mrs. Ella had once said, sweeping dust from the school's back corridor. "When you give them breath, they change you first, then they change others." And Chinelo believed her. Every afternoon, after classes ended, she would sit under the almond tree near the science block, once the scene of her cruelest humiliation, and write. Sometimes she penned poems, other times letters she never sent, and often reflections about her day, her fears, her dreams. Some students began to gather quietly around her, not to mock, but to listen, to ask questions, to feel safe. What had started as whispers of admiration became a gentle following. A girl named Amaka, small for her age and painfully shy, asked one day if Chinelo could read something she had written. "I hide my notebook under my mattress," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Chinelo took the pages with care, read them by lantern light that night, and the next day returned them with a smile that said more than praise ever could. "You have something rare," she told her. "Don't ever let the world shame you into silence." Word spread. More girls came, then a few boys. Chinelo began holding little storytelling circles beneath the tree on Fridays. She didn't advertise it, didn't announce it. She just showed up, and others followed. They laughed together, cried at each other's fears, and celebrated small wins. A boy who once stammered through introductions read a full story out loud. A girl who had stopped speaking in public since being ridiculed in class found her voice again. The tree became their sanctuary, its roots a circle of healing. Meanwhile, William grew quieter. His pride, once armored by laughter and fear, now sat cracked and hollow. He still walked the halls with shoulders squared and lips curled in habitual sneers, but his eyes told a different story, one of confusion, of envy, of a boy no longer certain where he stood. His friends had dwindled, and though he would never admit it, there were days he looked at Chinelo not with scorn, but with a pang of something unfamiliar. One afternoon, just after the closing bell, Chinelo found him standing alone outside the principal's office, holding a slip of paper and staring at the floor. She passed him without a word, but his voice stopped her. "Why do you keep doing this?" he asked, not looking up. "Acting like you've already forgiven everything." She turned slowly, watching him. "Because if I don't let it go," she said quietly, "it keeps owning me, and I've already lost enough." He didn't reply. Chinelo gave a soft nod and walked on. The sky overhead was beginning to shift toward dusk, a beautiful orange bleeding through gray, and she felt something settle inside her like peace returning to its rightful place. At home, her father noticed the change too. Chinelo spoke more, now laughed freely, even helped organize books at the local library on weekends. Her scar had faded slightly, but she no longer paid it any mind. When curious children asked about it, she told them the truth, how a moment of cruelty became her turning point, how pain had tried to ruin her, but she had made something beautiful from it instead. Adults often listened in, stunned by the wisdom threaded in her voice. One day her father returned from work holding a newspaper. "You won't believe this," he said, placing it on the table. There on the third page was a small photo of Chinelo beneath the almond tree, a caption reading, "Young girl inspires school with weekly storytelling sessions." A local journalist had heard about her from a teacher and decided to visit quietly, one Friday afternoon. Chinelo had no idea she was being watched. She was simply doing what had become her quiet mission. That night, the community buzzed with praise. Neighbors who once gave her pitiful glances now offered warm greetings and thoughtful words. Chinelo felt none of the pride that sought applause. Instead, she felt a deep, sacred responsibility. If her story could light even one flicker of hope in someone else, then every hardship had been worth it. The principal invited her to speak during assembly. The request terrified her at first, but she accepted with a steady heart. On the day of her speech, she stood in front of the entire school, the same students who had laughed, judged, whispered, but there was no fear in her this time. She opened her notebook, took a breath, and began. "I used to believe my scar was a curse," she said. "I thought I would never be seen for anything else, but I was wrong. Pain can bury you, yes, but it can also plant you. If you choose growth, you rise." There was no sound in the hall, except her voice, and when she finished, the applause wasn't thunderous. It was warm, heartfelt, lasting. Even William clapped, though no one saw the lone tear trailing down his cheek. That night, Chinelo sat on her rooftop beneath a wide sky full of stars, her notebook open, her pen moving like it had a life of its own. She wrote not about scars or pain, but about becoming, about how some of the most beautiful things are born not despite fire, but because of it. And as the night wind danced around her, she smiled, knowing her journey was still unfolding. One story, one breath, one thank you at a time. The days that followed Chinelo's speech seemed to move with a different rhythm, as if the very air around her had shifted. Something in the fabric of her world had been rewoven, tighter, stronger, warmer. The school, once a minefield of judgment and mockery, began to bloom into a space of cautious openness. Teachers who used to overlook students like her now paused longer at desks, asked better questions, listened more intently. Students began to hold themselves differently too, not perfect, not always kind, but increasingly aware that their words had weight and their actions could carve more than moments. They could carve lives. Chinelo continued her storytelling. Circles beneath the almond tree, but now with chairs borrowed from classrooms, a chalkboard someone had donated, and an unofficial name, the Story Soil. What had started with 5 students had now grown to dozens. They came from different years, some even from neighboring schools. drawn by the magnetic pull of shared vulnerability and truth. And Chinelo, still soft-spoken, still unassuming, had become a quiet leader, one who lifted others not with grandeur, but with grace. The principal eventually approved a school-wide writing competition, the first of its kind, with the winner's story to be read aloud during the district's education week. Chinelo encouraged everyone to participate, especially those who never dared pick up a pen. Amaka won second place. A boy named Boma, who had struggled with dyslexia, received a special mention for creativity. Chinelo didn't compete herself. She had no need. She had already found what she came for. Meanwhile, her home life had transformed in rhythm with her spirit. Her father, once weary and broken by circumstance, now sat with her each evening under the glow of a flickering bulb, reading her stories aloud, even the ones she hadn't meant for anyone else. His laughter returned, slow and tender at first, then full. Her mother, whose silence had once pierced like cold wind, now held Chinelo's cheeks between her palms and whispered blessings into her forehead when she thought no one was listening. Even the neighbors spoke differently. There were rumors of a scholarship, of sponsorship from a woman in the city who had read about Chinelo's work in the newspaper and sent a letter asking to support her education. But Chinelo, ever rooted, took the news with a calm heart. Her dreams were never about escape, they were about becoming. She had no desire to flee her village or erase her past. She wanted to build something lasting, right where the pain had once tried to bury her. One Saturday, while sorting through donations for a small community library she was helping establish, Chinelo saw William again. He wasn't alone. He was with a group of younger boys, showing them how to fix the hinges on an old bookshelf. He didn't notice her at first, or maybe he did and pretended not to. But their eyes eventually met. There was no hostility, no shame. Just two people who had shared a storm and survived it in different ways. He approached her after the boys left, his voice careful, his posture unsure. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, "but I wanted to say thank you for not letting what I did define you, for showing me what better looks like." Chinelo didn't respond with words. She just nodded slowly, letting the moment settle between them like dust after rainfall. It wasn't about friendship or reconciliation. It was about recognition, about the slow, hard-won healing that sometimes takes place in silence. That evening, she walked home alone, her heart both light and heavy. Growth was not a line. It was a loop, always circling back to test what you had learned. Pain might visit again. Cruelty might find new names, new faces. But she knew who she was now, knew what she carried, and more importantly, knew what she was willing to pass on. Months later, during the village's annual cultural festival, Chinelo was invited to present an original story on the main stage. The air was thick with the scent of grilled maize, drumming pulsed from nearby tents, and laughter wove through the crowd like wind through tall grass. She stepped onto the platform wearing a simple Ankara dress her mother had sewn, notebook in hand, the microphone trembling slightly in her grip. She looked out into the sea of familiar faces, teachers, classmates, elders, strangers, and she spoke. She told the story of a girl once called Ugly, a girl who fell, bled, cried, and rose, a girl who found her strength not in beauty or revenge, but in truth, in love, in story. As she spoke, there were tears, there was silence, and then thunderous applause that rose and fell like waves. That night, under a sky heavy with stars, Chinelo sat by the fire with her family. Her father hummed an old song, her mother braided her hair, and the children nearby begged her to tell just one more story. She smiled and began, her voice steady, warm, unshaken. For Chinelo had learned that scars do not mean the end. They are simply where the light enters. And in that light, she had not only found herself, but had helped others find themselves too. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and press the bell icon button. Thanks.